Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Catherine Sievett, Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture at the Weitzman School of Design, where I also have the honor to serve as the faculty co-director, along with our Dean Fritz Steiner, of the McHarg Center for Urbanism and Ecology. I'm delighted to welcome all of you and our speakers, especially our guests as well, for our fall symposium entitled Designing for Fire, an extraordinary gathering convened by my colleague, Professor Nicholas Pevsner. The McHarg Center is our department's transdisciplinary faculty research platform. Its many activities include funding and broadcasting original scholarly research, convening students, faculty, and practitioners, and awarding the annual McHarg Fellowship. Our mission as a center is to advance ecological thinking and design to address challenges to life on Earth at every scale. As we gather here today in the Kleinman Center here at the Fisher Fine Arts Library, constructed in 1880s from sandstone, brick, and terracotta, all elements extracted from the very terrain around us, I'd like to acknowledge that this land and the place of the University of Pennsylvania is the ancestral homeland and territory of the Lenni Lenape peoples. As members of an educational community, we are obligated to know the histories of dispossession that have allowed the University of Pennsylvania to grow and thrive on this vibrant terrain. As designers and thinkers, we endeavor in ways to build that lead toward justice, and we are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing consequences of settler colonialism. Designing for fire gives agency indeed to flame and our place in an earthly world of cyclical disturbance ecologies and interspecies entanglements, to expanded thresholds, and to the cultural importance of our grasslands and forests, and our role in caring for these places. We now necessarily grapple with both the climate crisis and the crisis of mass extinction, and we are honored tonight to be in this space with Elizabeth Azzuz, a Yurok tribal member from the village of Huechpus in Northern California, and a director of traditional fire and treasurer of the Cultural Fire Management Council. As landscape architects, we must recognize Indigenous land management practices that are critically valuable to any discussion of long-term land stewardship. As a First Nation Dene leader from the Northwest Territories of Canada stated during the Berger Inquiry in the 1970s, I quote, "There is no word in our language for wilderness, for everywhere we go is our home." People are forever a part of nature and part of the forest. Indeed, the so-called wilderness has never been uninhabited. We have many examples of these well-stewarded natures. For example, an old-growth boreal forest in Quebec's Michigamish Broadback Valley is stewarded by the Cree First Nation, Awaswanapi, and part of their ancestral lands. As a strategy for tackling biodiversity loss, Canada has established Indigenous protected areas to help manage its taiga, or boreal forest. The taiga is the world's largest intact forest ecosystem and one of its biggest stores of carbon. The Cree act to resist deforestation and safeguard this valuable carbon sink. The Menominee tribal forest in northern Wisconsin is stewarded and harvested by the Menominee tribe. They've sustainably logged their forest for over 160 years, a carefully managed balance of hand cutting and regrowth that has produced over 200 million cubic feet of timber since 1854. This biodiverse forest is home to wolves, bears, otters, and hawks, respected by the Menominee as kin. The Menominee select and cut only trees that are very old or sick and harvest those that have fallen, leaving high-quality trees to reproduce. And finally, the Gondwana Link project in the Great Western Woodlands of Australia is part of the world's largest temperate forest. This project, a gathering of a patchwork of parks, refuges, and protected areas, shares its restoration efforts with the Ngaju and Nyungar peoples. Working across artificially delineated borders in respectful partnership with lived, traditional, and embodied ecological knowledge, this is certainly the best way forward as we face today's grand challenges. We're so delighted to welcome this evening Elizabeth Azzuz to share her work and generational knowledge with our students, our faculty, and our guests. We're honored to share and learn from you and your work. And I'm now delighted to invite Nick Pevsner to the podium to properly introduce both the framing of the symposium, Designing for Fire, and our keynote speaker, Elizabeth Azzuz. Welcome again, everyone.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Hello, everyone. I'm Nick Pevsner, an assistant professor here in landscape architecture at the Weitzman School of Design. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Designing for Fire Symposium. This symposium is being co-hosted by the Department of Landscape Architecture and the McHarg Center for Urbanism and Ecology. And I'd also like to thank Native American and Indigenous Studies at Penn for their additional support, specifically their support of tonight's keynote lecture. And a big thank you to the Landscape Department's fabulous front office team, Ray Zarati, Erin, Melissa, as well as my RA Liz Vanderwerken and Ryan Lane for the graphic design on the poster and programs and getting everything ready for today. This symposium is interested in exploring how we approach design for novel wildfire and forest landscapes in a moment when we know that these systems are in flux, when climate change is driving increased levels of heat and drought, when wildfire behavior seems to be continually changing and throwing out new surprises. But climate is not the whole story here. And while the wildfire and forest landscapes we are designing towards might be novel, fire itself, of course, is not a new phenomenon. As it's always been, fires need fuel to burn. The fuel is generally vegetation, and vegetation accumulates to the extent that maintenance regimes let them. For centuries, Western settler society, Spanish, American, Canadian, at federal, state, and provincial levels, has been messing with the historical fire ecology of many North American forests through clearing and logging, development and land use change, through displacement, dispossession, and violence, and by imposing our laws and cultural beliefs on people who have long established relationship to fire and forests. Because, of course, people have long guided the management of these landscapes since time immemorial, it's fair to say. As someone who studies and teaches about human-altered ecosystems, that's the socio-ecological systems in urban ecology jargon that my former UE students in the room have heard so much about, the wildfire situation in Western North America is perhaps the ultimate socio-ecological challenge. Ecological dynamics inextricably linked with human institutions, policies, cultural attitudes, and physical infrastructures and maintenance regimes. As we'll hear about tomorrow, the imposition of Western ideas about fire suppression, such as seeing fire as what the nation's first forester Gifford Pinchot once called the dragon devastation that must be stamped out, and as he said, confronted in his own home cave, as he put it, has resulted in a profoundly changed set of forests, denser, more flammable, with more fire-intolerant species and more prone to catastrophic burns than their historic condition. It means that romantic ideas about leaving nature well enough alone, or nature restoring itself, is not going to cut it anymore, because nature is not playing by the same rules and is playing on a dramatically different game board today. Tomorrow, we'll hear about projects attempting to grapple with the forest restoration challenge, doing excellent forest restoration work, dealing with excess biomass that doesn't have clear economical routes to market, intervening in the way that communities build amongst these forests, and getting them to a place where they can once again re-enter a healthy cycle of low-intensity fire. I hope you can come back tomorrow for the day of amazing presentations and panel discussions with an incredible group of presenters who have all traveled to be with us here today and tomorrow. Tomorrow's presentations and panel discussions will be starting at 11 a.m. right here in the Kleinman Forum. We'll have coffee and hopefully lots of space for interdisciplinary conversation about the complex problems of forest management, forest bioeconomies, wood products manufacturing, and wildfire resilient design. But tonight, to kick things off, we have a keynote speaker who can speak to the delicate project of bringing back the fire. Cultural burning by indigenous peoples has, of course, been central to the stewardship of North America's forest landscapes for millennia, and many of the challenges we'll be exploring in this symposium stem from the fateful decision by governments and agencies to try to eradicate fire from the landscape. The Cultural Fire Management Council has been working to bring fire back to the landscape of the Yurok Reservation along the Klamath River in Northern California, while providing training and jobs on the Yurok Reservation and operating training exchanges to train future fire lighters in prescribed and cultural burns, giving them the needed skills to work with fire safely. Our keynote speaker, Elizabeth Azzuz, is a Yurok tribal member and Karuk descendant, and as Catherine mentioned, is Director of Traditional Fire, of Family Burns, and Treasurer to the Cultural Fire Management Council. She's also Treasurer to the Indigenous Stewardship Network, and is a member of the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network with the Nature Conservancy. And so it is my great pleasure now to welcome Elizabeth Azzuz to the podium to kick off the Designing for Fire Symposium. Elizabeth.
Very short. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. So I like to do things in story form. I am a cultural practitioner. I am not a scientist. I am not an academic. I am a tribal elder who has carried this knowledge since I was 4 years old. So my grandfather caught me playing with matches when I was a child, and decided that if I was old enough to play with fire, that I was old enough to learn my responsibility to the mother. And so my training began. Our elders expect us to sit at their feet while we learn, and so I have sat at the feet of many elders and absorbed their knowledge, and I carry it with me since we don't have a written history in Yurok culture, we have an oral history. So I learned that as a true human being, and I'm going to tell you, a 4-year-old doesn't know what a true human being is. They learn that much later. It was my responsibility to care for the mother. It was my responsibility to care for all those that live on her and dwell on her. That it was my responsibility to use the greatest tool left to us to heal the land, which is fire. And so my whole life I've known that I had a responsibility to care for the people, to care for the land, the water, the air, and all the beings that dwell there. So fast forward a few years later, my fire sister and I, Margot Robbins, decided that we were going to build a nonprofit. So we have the first female Indigenous nonprofit fire prescribed training facility in California. It's been an interesting journey. It really has, because when I moved home, I was a retired medical person, and I thought, I'm just going to garden. I was so happy with myself. And Margot said, but I need you to help me. And so we started helping each other down this path. And we were burning for basket materials. So hazel is a serotinous plant. It was a plant that we use for our baskets. It's a plant that we use to build the frame of our life, as we like to call it. So a few pictures here. Here's our first training facility. We bought this land from a local community member who wanted an exorbitant amount of money, and for 5 years we kept telling this poor gentleman we could not afford his land. And so after 5 years of negotiating, he sat down with us and said, you girls need to take care of this land, and you girls are the only ones that can do it, so pay me this amount and you can have it. So we did. We cut a nice little check thanks to an anonymous donor of $1 million, and we now have our training facility. This is our first group of participants in our facility that got to come to our training exchange. These are practitioners from all over the United States. They come into our territory and they learn how to work with fire. They learn how to work with the land, work with the environment, the elements, and we teach them everything about what it means to be a cultural practitioner as well as a prescribed firelighter. These are some of our Trex trainers and some of our participants. And what they are doing is they're gathering tea. So we often have a little bit of time before we start lighting, and our botanist will start screaming, there are resources on the unit, everybody run and gather before we light. So we're gathering traditional tea there, and all of the tea that was gathered in that unit goes to the elders in our community. So they're really excited to see this. As soon as I posted this picture online, they're like, I haven't had tea in years. So guess what we got to do? This picture here is really important to me because it is the first entry into the center of the Yurok world with fire in over 100 years. The family that lived there has maintained and cared for that village since time immemorial. And their elder was begging us to bring fire back to that territory. And it was an interesting burn because Cultural Fire is a nonprofit in Yurok territory, and even though we are Yurok tribal members, we don't necessarily have free reign in our own territory to burn. So we had to meet with tribal council, we had to meet with the elders committees, we had to meet with everyone in charge of our area and explain how we were not going to lose that fire, how we were going to care for that elder and her environment, and how we were going to not make them look bad. That's a hard job. This is the drone footage, and hopefully I don't mess this up, sorry. It may be loud. Our drone operator is very excited because he knows that you're all going to be looking at this. And so he wanted to have his best foot forward. Cultural Fire has an aviation program. So a few weeks ago, we had our first nighttime drone operations. So obviously these are during the day. We blacked the entire edge of the unit before we went in. And then the drone operator programmed how many feet apart he was going to drop these dragon eggs, where they were going to roll, are they going to bounce, what are they going to do, and how are we going to keep it in the containment unit. So we burned until about 1 a.m, just maintaining everything the drone had put down on the ground. And just slowly let that fire walk all the way down the hill until it hit the bottom of the unit, and then we all went home. But these drone operations have been really successful in helping the community be comfortable with what we do, helping them to reacquaint themselves with fire. So most people have to reintroduce themselves to fire. They have to be comfortable with her. They have to know that she is going to stay where we put her. And they have to know that she is not a raging beast that everyone thinks she could be if she's allowed to run free. I call her a she because she's very unpredictable. And she does pretty much whatever she feels like any time of the day or night. And so this is just a little bit of what we get to do on a daily basis. And it's my favorite thing in the world. So most people fear fire. I love fire. And this is one of the reasons why, because I get to see amazing shots like this. Yeah. I get to visit amazing people all around the country and talk to them about the need for fire on the land, good fire on the land.
Fast, fast. It's helpful. I'm no cinematographer. Maddie's got the eye for framing. You know?
I'm letting you listen to them because they're all very excited about what they're doing. And we all hear this on the radio. So it doesn't matter where we're at. We're listening to all these conversations. And a little bit about me, I drive a Type 6 engine. And so generally I am sitting way off on the perimeter somewhere and have no idea what's happening. So I just get to listen to the radio and hear all their excited voices and know when something flares up or something happens. And sometimes wishing I was the drone operator.
Get in on there at work right now.
I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide here if I can.
20 minutes. Yeah.
So this slide is aspiring firelighters. Cultural Fire Management Council has training exchanges, 3 a year, where we bring people from all over the world to train to be firelighters. We have aspiring firelighters programs, which are people who've never worked with fire. We invite them to come into our territory, learn how to use all the equipment, and learn how to burn safely. And then we travel with them. So I spent a week with the Amamatsin before they came to our territory, walked through their land, saw what they wanted to restore, and I'm helping them to create their prescribed fire program in their territory. It's not as easy as it sounds. There are a lot of permits, a lot of paperwork, a lot of things that have to happen before you can actually put fire on the land. And people don't know the first thing about doing that. I didn't know the first thing about doing that when I started. So Margot says to me, get these permits. And I'm like, from who? So it turns out, that air quality wants permits, that the watersheds want permits, that CAL FIRE, Forest Service, BIA, everybody wants a permit. And they want all that in place before you actually put fire on the ground. And so I learned a lot over the years, and now we share that knowledge with everyone because no one should struggle to bring fire back to the land. No one should not know what it's like to be able to care for the environment, and it shouldn't be this hard. There's just no reason it should be this difficult. These are some of the foods that do well after fire. That massive chicken of the woods lives in my driveway. And my grandson loves to burn under it because he says he's growing mushrooms. The acorns in that tray are some that I gathered in the Yurok Food Forest. So we recently burned the Yurok Food Forest for the first time. And 2 weeks after that burn, we were able to go in and gather acorns and mushrooms and provide for our community. So one of the things that we do with the resources that we gather from these units is provide to our elders, provide to our young families, provide to people who are learning about their first foods again. So there are quite a few generations of Yurok tribal members that were raised off the reservation, and that's simply because of the boarding school era. A lot of their families did not move back to the reservation after, and so they don't know what it's like to be Indigenous. And it's been interesting not just training people about fire, but training them to be human beings again. This is one of my favorite traditional foods. So I gather pretty much from everywhere I burn. These elderberries, I use the flowers to make syrups. I make elderberry syrup, jelly, and elderberry rub, which is a cough syrup. So all of these things come from one plant. You know, it's amazing what you can find in nature, and what you're capable of doing with it is really up to you. So we work with our tribal food securities program. We provide all the foods and resources from our burns, and they teach our younger generation how to process all of these foods. It's really cool to watch them walk into a room not knowing what they're doing and to leave with cases of things that they process themselves and to be able to give that to their families. This is my fire sister, Margot, and I. We often present together, and those are baskets that she has woven or her family members have woven. The tall basket next to her is a baby basket. That's the reason cultural fire became what it is. Margot wanted to ensure that all of her grandchildren were carried in a traditional baby basket. And so she was running out of hazel. She had used everything that she had available, everything her grandmother had left, anything she could bum from anybody that had hazel. It takes approximately 350 to 400 hazel sticks to produce a baby basket. And we had a lot of work ahead of us. There were a lot of elder women saying, we don't have the materials we need. So hazel, beargrass, all of these plants are serotinous, the plants that we burn for. They need fire to be usable and pliable. And so we started our journey down the road. We started working out of our cars. We started working in any space that we could bum from anyone. And we built this organization. We did not intend to become as large as we are. We really honestly just wanted to burn for basket materials. But then our elders that sit on our board said, you need to protect our homes. You need to protect our children. You need to protect our community. And what are you girls going to do about it? And here we are. We now have 25 employees, multiple engines, drones, our own facility, a shop, and then we're researching for funding to build barracks for our participants so that they don't have to camp when they come and burn with us. So all of that dreaming for hazel sticks resulted in where we are now. We often do basket presentations in our training so people understand why we're burning, why we started this. I have this picture of this cap here because my cousin, who has traveled on now, was an artist that said that, you know, we dance, we sing, we carry songs. That's a type of cap that our women wear in ceremony. And it's very important because it's usually a lifeline of a family. A family's history is told in a lot of these baskets. And so you know what family a basket came from based on the design that's in that basket. And we also know where those materials came from because we burned for them. This is my botanist, Claire Brown, and my aviation specialist, Max Brotman. They came to us as local community members who had bought a piece of land who wanted to learn to restore their land. And so they asked if they could come to a training exchange. And we said, yeah, absolutely, that'd be awesome. They're still with us 10 years later. Claire runs our botany program. Our elders wanted to know, are we burning for the right reasons? Are we burning too hot? Are we not burning hot enough? What are we doing? And so Claire was ecstatic to be able to go out and talk to these little plants like they're human. She has a full study on them that tells us, are we burning too hot? Are we not burning hot enough? What do we need to do to protect that environment in that area? And how do we make these materials better? Max was sent to Maryland with 2 of our other employees to become a drone operator. We asked all of our staff who wanted to operate a drone, and no one raised their hand but Max. He jumped up and down and was barely he was just like, pick me, pick me. And, we're like, Max, this is going to be a lot of training, So we got him the drone. He did all his hours, and now he has an Ignis drone, which is a $97,000 toy with remote control that basically can burn off a unit and protect an entire community without putting any humans in harm's way. That was the main reason for us buying that drone, was our terrain is extremely steep, and we were worried about putting participants in that territory. What happens if they slip, fall, roll down the hill? God knows many of us have. And we wanted to protect people. And so Max now can program an entire unit and burn it off with us just standing on the perimeter watching it and keeping it in box. So I'm teaching them how to process woodwardia. Woodwardia is a fern, obviously. So when we burn riparian areas, we stop putting fuel down within 50 feet of a riparian area, and we just let the fire walk its way down into that waterway and take care of the plants. We don't want to put any chemicals on our land at all if we don't have to, so we're working on different biofuels that would help not put petroleum products onto the land. The Yurok Reservation is a non-herbicide, fungicide, pesticide, GMO territory. So we really try to protect our land the best we can and protect our people in the process. So this fern, when you flatten it out, open it up, there are 2 long twines inside of it, and we dye them red with alder bark. And so a lot of the things that we burn for create the colors in our baskets. They create the patterns. So we have a wide variety of materials we have to take care of. These are foods that do well after fire. We've been teaching the children how to eat bracken ferns. First, they were like, they're disgusting and slimy. But they really enjoy going out into these units and picking these foods, taking them back into their classroom and learning to process them, learning to eat what's available in the forest and how to find food and water in the forest. So our burns aren't just about fire. They're about teaching people how to live with the land, teaching people how to care for their environment, and teaching children, because we believe in intergenerational transfer of knowledge. So my grandson is 6. He just had his first fire learning in ceremony. So during our brush dances, which are our dances for the health of our children, which we have yearly, he learned to tend fire. And what that meant was he was giving the fire a bite of salmon. He was giving the fire a bite of acorn soup. And he was giving it angelica root. These are all foods and medicines that we're offering to the Creator to give us those things back in return. And so he's 6. He thought this was the greatest thing in the world, thought he was the only one doing it, until he turned around and all his cousins were standing behind him waiting for their turn. So we're teaching that future generation how to care for everything in our environment, how to provide their own foods, how to be respectful of their community, their elders, the environment, the water, everything. They learn every piece of who they are as human beings while they're in ceremony. This is one of my favorites, is the indicators. So I put a baby sturgeon on there because I think they're the most adorable thing on earth. But they're prehistoric. Sturgeon have been here since the dinosaurs, basically. And that teeny tiny little guy lives underneath the sand at the edge of the river for years before he comes out and goes out into the ocean, swims back up into the territory and reproduces himself, and then just moves back out to the ocean again. So that little bitty guy is, how do you say? The dogwood tells us when they're coming. So when the dogwood are blooming at home, we know the sturgeon are running. When we hear the frogs singing, it's because it's raining. That means the eels are going to come in. And so we have all these cultural species indicators that we pay attention to. All of our kids learn this. They learn this from Head Start preschool on into university in our territory. We bring them all out to our burns. They all get to come and witness what it's like to burn in our territory. And they're all part of a test fire. So when we are getting ready to put fire on the land, we use traditional torches. These traditional torches in this are Karuk, Yurak, and Pomo and Hupa torches. So the Pomo is the large manzanita that is full of pitch and sticks. So in their territory in Lake County, they have a lot of grasslands, and so it's easier for them to burn with those sticks. In our territory, we use the wormwood, pitchy sticks, and angelica root. Those are 3 forms of medicine that we use as Indigenous people. And when we put up prayers in smoke, we're asking permission from the land, the animals, and every being that exists with us to come into their home and to put fire on the ground. We don't assume we have that right, because that's not our home only. It belongs to everything that lives there with us. And so when we put up that medicine, put that smoke up, the animals know that we're coming into their home. So they move. You know, you often see bears and deer leaving the units. You see the birds moving further up in the canopy. You even see insects climbing the trees, going further up into the tree canopy to protect themselves. And so we know that we've alerted them all that we're going to be there, and we're there to protect them and to care for them. And so they know. The long pitchy stick is something Karuk uses in their territory. So we, like I said, we try not to put any chemicals in our territories if we can, and we try to use natural ignition sources. And so I just wanted you all to see what different torches look like. And then, of course, there are the drip torches that have diesel and gasoline mix in them, and that's what's used for large areas. So Cultural Fire does broadcast burning. We don't just do pile burning, so we can burn anywhere from 5 acres up to 150 acres at a time, sometimes more. It depends. The largest acre we've done is 350 acres, and that was an all-night burn. We literally didn't make it to the highway until about 2 in the morning. And at that point, I had to be up at 5 o'clock to be back for the next day. So this is exhausting work. But thank you all for having me here. I'm honored to be here, and I hope you all enjoy this next couple days.
Hi, I was wondering if you do any mechanical thinning before you put fire on the ground, or if you don't have to do that or not.
Sometimes we do, yeah. It really depends on the unit. It depends on the property owner that we're burning for. Some people don't want a lot of wood chips in their territory. Other people want that the wood chips for their gardens. So it really does depend on each unit that we're burning. And we have an application process. So that tells us whether the landowner wants us to do mechanical treatment, what do they want done with that, do they have any cultural resources, and will they allow anyone else to gather there if they do?
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for sharing all the photos and the histories and the full life cycle of what fire means. Like, I love that you brought that here, because I think so few of us understand the interconnectedness of the system, right? And I love that you're always asking. You're saying, I would like to bring fire here because it's a restorative force, which all of that is to say that I would love to hear more about the process of restoring that culture. What do you feel like is truly lost, if anything? And what do you feel like you can nourish through fire to reinvigorate your culture?
Yeah, I often realize how special a place that I live in because I have been allowed to burn since I was a child. I was telling Nick that when I was younger, I had the great fear of the red and the green truck, and I would get a stomach ache every time I saw them. The reason for that was my elders told me that they didn't believe that those entities would shoot children. And so I had a healthy fear of them for many years. But it was about maybe, I guess, 5 to 7 years ago, somewhere around there, that I didn't get a stomach ache when I saw them. And I realized that all the work that we're doing, all the information that we're putting out about what we do is changing hearts and minds. And so our territory, we have multiple tribes that we're surrounded by, and we all use fire to restore our environment. So taking it outside of our territory has been really interesting for me because first I had to meet with the elders and the culture committee. And I had to explain why I'm giving away so much information that they believed should stay home. And I explained that we live in a world now that doesn't think the same way we do, and that we can't protect the mother if we're not all doing it. Because believe me, there's more than just Indigenous people that need to restore the land. We all need to care about her. Because if we don't have air. We don't have water. We don't have all the valuable resources that we need to thrive as humans. And so that's why we do what we do. Margot and I travel around the country. Margot's been to Australia. I've been to Greece. I was flown to Hawaii to talk about fire. You would think that Hawaii had an amazing fire history and culture, but it's been lost due to the same reasons many of ours have. And so I was really honored to sit with their elders and hear their stories. And their younger people were asking, why haven't you been telling us these stories? And they said, because nobody cared. Nobody listened. And so it was really interesting to see those young people open up their eyes and to realize that their elders had that information all along. They just needed to sit down and have a conversation with them. They needed to ask them, what's important for our land? How do we take care of it? And so now watching it grow across the planet is amazing for me because it's not just us pushing the rock up the hill now. There's a lot of us, and we don't have to push anymore. We can just talk to each other and do the work. So thanks for your question.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us and spreading the word of how important this work is. I wanted to know, with all of these fires that are happening so much more frequently these days, how long do you think it would take to restore this practice and keep our forests safe by implementing this? And also, how can we as individuals help to spread how important this work is?
Yeah, Margot and I like to say that you have Congress people that you need to talk to, politicians that you need to speak to. You know, they all need to understand that we're not trying to destroy the planet. We're trying to protect her. And that's the thing that's really important in these conversations is everybody needs to know that there's a way to do this safely. And if you look to your Indigenous communities in your own territories, 9 times out of 10, they're already doing this. They're just having to do it quietly because there's permitting processes, there's governmental restrictions, there's policies in place that don't believe that Indigenous people need to, or should say, know how to care for the land. I've been doing this my whole life, and so I never realized that it wasn't happening everywhere else. I just assumed everyone was doing what we were doing. It was eye-opening to realize that we need to have these conversations everywhere. We need to talk to all communities. We need to meet with politicians. Margot and I meet with Congress and Senate subcommittees and talk to them about this and explain, that we are not trying to destroy this planet. We really need to save her. And we can't do that without all the governmental agencies on board. They all need to want to help. They all need to care as much as we do. The dollar isn't going to save us if there's no air, if there's no water. What are you going to do? What are you going to eat? How are you going to survive?
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm thinking about how much learning tends to happen on burns when you're burning with people, especially with how many people you've invited to your territory. And I'm curious whether your community has learned and adopted any practices from other communities through this process, and if you could share what some of those might be.
Yeah, we actually have. I have a deal with myself. I must learn something new every day. I'm about to be 63, and I realize there's a whole lot I still don't know. But I've learned something amazing from everyone that's came into our territory. I've learned about their territories and what they want to restore, what they want to protect. They've learned about how to use fire in a way that can safely help their communities and help their people. And so it's called a training exchange for a reason. We train them, they train us. It's really interesting for them to watch our children. Our children are out there barefoot with warm wood and pitchy sticks lighting a test fire. So when we pray, we send up a song, and then we have the test fire. And our little ones are doing that. They're little bitty guys with no shoes on, which scares CAL FIRE half to death. The Forest Service is like, oh my God, why are you endangering your children? We're not endangering our children. We're teaching them how to care for the mother. And we didn't have shoes. We didn't have Nomex. We didn't have all this safety gear when we were doing this as, people on the land. Those are things that came later. And so I really don't want our children to know that they have to be wrapped in basically Nomex to, safely burn. But yeah, the learning part is key. It's amazing to have these things. We have name games in the beginning where we learn about each other, so we're not out in the woods going, hey, you. We actually know who's out there, what their name is. And in that process is when we learn about why they came to us, why they want to protect their environment, why they care about their children and their future. And so learning is key. That's the whole piece to it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I was wondering if, just kind of speaking to the question of scaling up this thing in this process, I know that so much of the forest land in the US is owned by the federal government, BLM, Forest Service. Could you talk a little bit about what collaborating with those agencies who own such larger amounts of land has looked like, and if they've been receptive to sort of integrating more indigenous traditional fire knowledge?
Yeah. In the beginning, they were not. They were not excited about us at all. I really enjoy actually building relationships with those agencies. So Margot and I like to say she's the bad cop and I'm the good cop. So depending on what we need, that depends on who's going to attack or tag team that particular group. So I built relationships with these agencies while I was building my knowledge on the permitting processes. So I learned to work within their frame, and then I taught them about our frame, taught them about why we do what we do, invited them to come to our trainings. And so it's really interesting when you have a fire agency of any governmental process rolling into your territory and everybody's like, oh my God, they're here, we got to behave ourselves. No, we're going to be who we are. We're going to teach them how important it is to care about the environment and how important it is for all of us to be doing this. So watching the Forest Service allow us to burn in their territory, I think the gentleman nearly had a heart attack, but he got comfortable real quick. And it was really nice to see him out there with the pitchy stick burning. CAL FIRE battalions will often tell me, Elizabeth, they're not allowed to touch a torch. And I'm like, could you define torch for me? And they're like, what are you asking? And I'm like, well, what kind of torch can't they touch? And they're like, a drip torch. So as soon as they leave, I hand them a pitchy stick. You know, I've trained many CAL FIRE suppression guys to use a pitchy stick to burn with. It's not a drip torch. They can't be held legally responsible for it because our burn boss holds the legal responsibility for what happens on our burn. And so when they leave a unit, they're like, Elizabeth, do you have any more pitchy sticks? You know, they get really excited because they take them with them to other burns, and then they can go burn in someone else's territory and feel comfortable about it. So just building those relationships is huge. You know, make that time. In the beginning, I would get so frustrated with like, oh God, here's another government agency I have to deal with. But now it's like, hey guys, what's up? You know, how are we going to help each other today? How are we going to make this planet a better place? And so just, as my grandmother said, a little honey goes a long ways, and vinegar gets you nowhere.
The U.S. Forest Service, like one of their key lines for however long has been that prescribed burns is a PR nightmare, even though it's the proper way of managing forests. Mm-hmm. So have you found that your introduction of traditional knowledge and advocacy of prescribed burns through your practices has actually helped broker relationships with the feds in a way that like allows them to actually manage forests in a proper way without the PR nightmare behind it?
Actually, I have. So we are, once again, really spoiled in our territory. A lot of our forest soups are indigenous. We have some high-ranking forest soups that are Yurok, Karuk, Hupa, and they are in all the forests around us. And so they advocate for us. They fight for us. They, as one of my relatives, Merv George, says, I had this great fear that I would have to arrest my father. So as a cultural practitioner, we use fire for ceremony. Those fires are lit 10 days before ceremony, and they do not go out until we are done. And so they start in the high country. And those fire practitioners that have carried fire their whole life bring that fire down to the river where the dances start. And then they carry it all the way back up into the high country where it will go out after we're done. And Merv's father was the head man for his village. And he said that, you know, my great fear is Dad's cultural fire is going to get out and I am going to have to arrest my own father. And so we make sure that we're very careful about what we do in our territory when we're building those relationships, that we don't damage them, because the future of good fire on the land depends on those relationships. And so it's something that we work really hard at. Yeah.
This desire to burn for basket weaving material. Mm-hmm. And then you also sort of alluded to communicating and speaking with elders and others in the territory to find out what their needs are, and there are various ways that you might be able to use fire to protect them. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, as this evolves for you and for your organization and your group, how have the uses of fire been diversified, or how have the desires for a result diversified? Are you burning for other things? How much has that expanded, and how much do you anticipate it expanding moving into the future?
Oh my gosh, forever and ever. We don't burn just for basket materials, foods, medicines, teas, obviously protection of our communities, our environment. But it really depends on each place we go. Everybody that we talk to, what's important for them? What's important for all of you in this room? You know, where do you come from? Where's your home? What do your people care about? What do they want? Do they live in forested areas? Do they live in suburbia? and all of that depends on our audience as to what we're doing. So, for me, I'm not just burning with cultural fire for our work. I also I carry fire and water for my family, and it's important for me to know that I'm using that tool properly. So in my territory, in my land, I'm moving basket materials into my yard because I'm not young anymore and I won't be able to climb those slopes. And so I'm cheating nature by moving it all into my yard so I can get it easily. But I still have to burn for them to grow healthy and happy in my environment. So hazel can be finicky. We save some of the bushes for nuts. We have to fight the squirrels for those because those are aggressive little guys, as I've seen out here. But, it's important to know that our food sources are still there, especially for people who live on the land. So for us, we gather. We're still subsistence people. We still hunt, fish, and gather and provide for our elders as much of their first foods as we can. There are some of our elders that still live in traditional homes. So they live in a half-subterranean house. The top is redwood above ground, but underneath the redwood is partially underground. And so we're burning to protect those redwoods so that those elders can still make their homes, so that the men can still make their dugouts out of the redwood, so that the kids, the future generations, will know that these are all resources that we are responsible for and that we need to have available to our people for the rest of our existence. So it's not just us we're looking after, it's everybody. Yes.
Hello, Elder Elizabeth. My name is Elise. I actually did not know that you would be speaking here today, so this was such a pleasant gift. Like, my heart is thundering. If I put my microphone down here, you could probably hear it. I haven't been this excited, I think, internally in a very long time, so thank you. Part of why I came to this workshop and why I'm studying what I'm studying is to understand how Indigenous communities have planned and designed for their communities, understanding that community is more than just people. You spoke about listening to the frogs to know when the eels are coming and when it's raining, the smoke, talking to the animals and letting them know what you're doing, asking for permission because it's not only your home. And I'm curious, two things. How do you, if you listen to the wind, how does he or she or they speak to you when it comes to these burns? And then outside of this element of fire, what other elements, maybe water, do you communicate with, and how do you incorporate them into your planning and design for your community as well?
Absolutely. So one of the things we teach in our training exchanges is paying attention to the weather. What time the wind shifts, what time does she come up the river, what time does she go back down. It's something we do in everyone's territory. So if we're burning in someone else's territory, the first thing I do is wander around and see what time of day their wind shifts, what time of day it's going to heat up, what time of day it's going to cool down, when is the wind going to shift in a different direction. That tells me how I can safely work with fire in someone else's territory, not just my own. Gosh, there's just so much that I could say about all that. And I actually lost the second part of your question. I'm really sorry. Oh, okay, yeah, sorry. Something really interesting came out of some of our trainings and working with our tribal departments. So we work with watershed, various wildlife departments, and find out what little beings live in our burn areas before we go in there. But we also found out from watershed that all of the charcoal and ash that we leave on the ground filters the water back into the ground table, which gives us clean water, which goes back into the creeks, rivers, streams, and out into the ocean. Unlike someone in the White House who seems to think that we're just letting it waste, it's actually being cleansed by the fire. So all that charcoal and ash left behind is doing its job. Another interesting thing about ash is we often find deer and elk rolling in that ash in the evening after we burned, and that's getting rid of the fleas and ticks and parasites on their body. So we have cameras in all of our units, And it's really interesting to see all these little creatures come back into their home after it's been burned and watch how they move in there. It's almost like they're really happy. You know, you see them rolling around, you see them being able to find the foods as they come up a few weeks later. Our children actually go out and gather native seeds in all of our units pre-burn. So all of those grasses, all of those seeds are taken from areas where we need forage for the elk and for the deer. And then 6 weeks after burn, all those same kids go back out and replant those units with the native seeds. So they have a connection to that. Now they've bought into it, and it's their responsibility. And all of that is because of what we do. You know, it was, like I said, our intention just for basket materials, but as we grew, we learned that there are so many other pieces to what we do, and we realized that we needed to share that knowledge with everyone. And like I said, our elders aren't always excited about things we share, but they understand that we're not the only ones that need this information now. And it took a while. I've been slapped on the hands a couple times. Believe it or not, they're elders older than me. And they do hold us in place. Doesn't matter how old we are, we still have a responsibility to them and what they expect us to do.
I have a question here. You're sorry. It's quite amazing to hear you talk about the land in such intimate ways and such deep knowledge of everything, how things function. But then you also show these amazing images from a drone, which means that you're also, taking on technology as a way to help the cause. And I'm very curious to know if the drone usage or other technologies help not only in assessing what's going on in real time, but in predicting, for example, forest conditions that might need treatment, so that you can sort of get ahead of the need using technology. And what is your relationship to technology generally tied to this deep knowledge of the land?
Well, now that you asked that, we actually have a project with NASA where they've brought in LiDAR and mapped our entire territory. And so we know when we need to re-enter a space to burn it. We need to know what drip lines are for trees, what's happening in that territory. That all came from the study with NASA. And really, honestly, they reached out to us because we were in the process of hunting for a grant for forest health. And they said, we have funding to do this. And so we invited them into our territory, and they wandered around the woods with us, and they looked at all the different trees that we use for food sources, all the different plants, and created a program, really honestly, that is geared towards our territory. And I'm pretty sure any and every organization that reaches out to them, they'd be more than happy to create a similar project for them. Technology is something that we cannot get away from. I always laugh that I live completely off grid, even though my fire sister put Starlink in my house to be able to find me. And so I was telling Nick that occasionally I'll walk by and just click it off and act like I'm not in civilization anymore. But, it's part of who we are and what we are. And I have grandchildren that live in civilization, as they call it. And even though they get no screen time, they realize that it is out there and other kids are getting it and they're not. So yeah, it's definitely part of our growing process. When we purchased 140 acres and bought this training facility, and in it is a whole IT system that's set up to map all of our units. It tells us what rotation we're in. It tells us when these certain plants will be ready. It tells us when we need to get the botanist out there, when we need to get, the foresters out there. And that's pretty much how we're having to manage our company now. It's growing so big that it's not just Margot and I anymore burning from our cars. We're now a huge organization.
Thank you so much for sharing so much. You said something that really caught my ear. You said training people to burn is training people to be human again. And I wondered if you could talk about the human. Do you mean Yurok human, or do you mean general human, or do you mean what kind of human, and how might that humanness then be transferred as a form of technology as well?
Yeah. So, like I said, a 4-year-old didn't know what being a true human being was. I spent my life learning from my elders how to be a true human being, how to care about other people, how to care about the environment, how to care about how I carry myself. Nobody thinks about this stuff when you're growing up. You know, we're going to be this, we're going to be that, we're going to be a scientist, we're going to be whatever. I always cared about the land and the people and the environment more than I cared about myself. And that was part of being a human being. So we all have it in us. You know, I'm sure you all have projects that you're just, it's part of your being, it's part of your soul, it's part of who you are, and that's your human part. That's, you know, how we evolve. Everybody does it differently. I personally am happiest when I'm wandering around the woods with no shoes on and just, you know, hanging out in my environment, listening to the animals, the birds sing, listening to the water, the rivers. They tell me what they need and what they want, and then I try to give it to them. Anyone else?
I have the mic, so I'm going to steal it, and then I'll pass it up. So I think in fire use, we often focus on intentional fire use, right? The sort of like the pitch sticks and all of the amazing traditions of bringing fire to landscapes. And I was wondering if you could speak to your tradition on your landscapes and or how you've interfaced with other mentalities or traditions in utilizing what Western science would call naturally ignited fires. I think we could argue about what's natural, but like lightning strikes versus human ignition.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak to like that type of fire, that nurturing, especially where I know that, or at least my experience and exposure has been that depending on your culture or tribe and your region, you might have different orientations to that natural ignition versus like human ignition.
Mm-hmm. I caught myself actually arguing with Forest Soup about lightning fires. Not so much arguing, but defending its right to be there. So in our territory, it's very mountainous, very rural, and the lightning strikes are usually in the high country. And those fires will burn into an old fire footprint and put themselves out. They'll just literally stop. They won't go any further. Doesn't matter if there's fuel on the other side of that line or not. They just stop there. Who knows why that is the way it is. But government agencies will spend billions of dollars trying to put that fire out, trying to put a bulldozer in cultural sensitive spaces. And we honestly show up and stand in front of that dozer and ask them not to destroy something that's so important to all of us. There's a place in our high country that all the tribes in our territory go to pray. And there was a road that was going to be put into there. It's called the Go Road. And all of the tribes got together and stood in front of those dozers and stopped that road because it was going to go into a culturally sensitive area. Because we all pray there, because our medicine is there. Not because we didn't have anything better to do, honestly, but we do have an obligation to protect things that are important to people in our territory. And so I'll fight for fire. I won't fight with fire. I won't fight against fire, but I will fight for her because she doesn't have the same voice that we have. So we're all responsible for what happens. We just have to decide what level do we want to do that in? Do we want to stand in front of a bulldozer? No. But we all have the obligation to protect the environment.
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation, for being with us today. You were talking a lot about working in communities and in landscapes and being part of that process of remembering how to burn, remembering those stewardship practices, and kind of being in community with people who are bringing that practice back. I'm really curious, as the climate is changing, as water regimes are changing, as plants and animals and forests and landscapes are themselves moving around and changing. I was wondering how you think about how fire will work in landscapes that maybe didn't burn as much in the past, and if you've had the opportunity to work with any communities that are trying to make new relationships or trying to think about what it looks like to burn in new ways.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We actually just had our 10th annual Indigenous Peoples Burning Network workshop. So when we started this, we had 3 tribes. You're at Karuk and Hupa. We could not agree on anything. We still can't agree. No one's ever right. Everybody's always wrong. We now have 27 tribes in that entity, and we've just added 5 buffalo tribes. And it's been interesting for me to go into grassland and burn when I'm used to forested territories that are seeped in, how would you say, coastal influences. So we have to wait for a certain time of the day for that fog to burn off and for it to get a certain amount of dryness before we can put fire on the land. And it happens everywhere we go. So that's the part of how wandering around someone else's territory, looking at their lands, seeing when the leaves are crunchy, when the grass is crunchy, seeing what's happening in that environment. And that's all part of being a fire practitioner. It's all part of what we teach and how we train people. And it's really important for people to realize, that every last one of our forests are different. Every Indigenous culture that lives there has that knowledge of how that forest survives, what it needs. It's just reacquainting everyone with that, opening up their eyes to how important it is to pay attention to the environment.
I sort of
I
have
think we have, so Barbara, last question for you.
Because concerning time, I mean, your territory where you've been working your whole life, you can see, I assume, how your tending to the forest changes, or does it change? I mean, I guess I'd like to hear. And then you go into other areas where, I mean, do you only go once? Do you go back? I mean, I'm just curious how the longer time frame plays into your work.
Yeah, we do actually do reentries with people when we visit with them, teaching them about bringing their programs to life or to reinvigorating something that has gone to sleep, basically. And so, in our territory, we know that every 3 to 5 years, we need to burn a hazel site. Every 2 to 5 years, depending on what type of sticks they're for. We know what our rotations are in our territory, but it's learning what people need in their territory that's the most interesting piece. And I love going back to see when they've moved their program 2 or 3 years ahead and where they're at and how excited their community is. Are their kids involved? Are their elders involved? What happens to a community once they regain their power? So fire knowledge was taken away from a lot of people by government agencies that didn't believe that Indigenous people know how to care for the land. We're not the only ones that used fire. Immigrants that came across this great land brought their fire practices with them from wherever they came. And they utilized those up until the government decided that no one knew what they were doing. It's not true. We all know and knew what we needed to do to care for the land. We just need certain agencies to step out of the way and allow us to be able to care for the planet again. Obviously we all need her. She needs us too. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you all so much for wonderful questions. Please stick around for some food and drinks outside. And please come back tomorrow at 11 a.m. right here for a whole day of fantastic panel discussions. Thank you.